Chapter 1. The Ritual of Ruin. Elara Vance wanted to die, or at least she wanted this dress to die. It was a beautiful thing made of moonlight silk and silver lace. Her mother had worked for 6 months to pay for it. No matter how hard she tried, Elara couldn't look at it without feeling like a lamb being dressed for dinner. She stood in the damp laundry room of the Silver Moon packhouse. The air was thick with the smell of lye and hot steam. Because the Alphas only valued beauty, Elara knew she had to be ugly. She looked at the white silk and felt a cold weight in her chest. Her mother had been chosen by a man who broke her spirit. Elara saw her mother cry every night because her mate treated her like a trophy. She wouldn't let that happen to her. Without thinking, she reached into the laundry hearth and grabbed a handful of cold, black soot. The grit felt like sand under her fingernails. She smeared the black ash across the white bodice. She rubbed it into the delicate lace until the silver thread turned dull and dirty. It felt good to destroy something so perfect. What's worse, she took a sharp, jagged stone from the floor. She used it to rip the hem of the dress until the silk hung in sad, dirty rags. "There," she whispered. Her voice was a small, sharp blade in the quiet room. "Now I'm just a wallflower. Now I'm nothing." Still, her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She knew Alpha Silas was looking for a mate to make his power grow. He wanted a queen who would sit still. He wanted a woman who would never speak back. Because of that, Elara made sure she looked like trash. She rubbed the soot onto her cheeks and into her messy brown hair. Next, she heard the heavy thrum of the drums. Boom, boom, boom. The sound moved through the stone floor and into her boots. It was the call to the great claiming. It was a sound that made every girl in the pack tremble. Some girls trembled with hope. Elara trembled with a fury that burned like fire. In that moment, she realized she wasn't just hiding. She was starting a war. What followed was a silence that felt heavier than the drums. Elara looked at her reflection in a bucket of soapy water. She looked like a beggar. She looked like a mess. She looked exactly the way she felt inside, broken, but dangerous. Maybe it was fate that brought her to this moment. She had to choose, be a slave in silk or a rebel in rags. Deep down, she knew the truth. If Silas saw her, he would see a girl who didn't fit in. He would see a girl who was a mistake. As if pulled by a string, she walked toward the door. Her boots clicked on the stone. Every step felt like a drumbeat of her own. She wasn't going to the altar to be claimed. She was going to the altar to survive. By the time she reached the hallway, the other girls were already lined up. They smelled like flowers and expensive perfume. They looked like dolls. Elara stood at the very back. Despite that, she felt eyes on her. She felt the judgment of the pack. She didn't care. More importantly, she had a plan. If she stayed in the shadows, she would stay free. Suddenly, the great oak doors swung open. The night air rushed in, smelling of pine and ancient power. The great claiming had begun. Elara took a deep breath. Her chest ached with the weight of her secret. She was the only girl in the pack who didn't want to be a mate. And all at once, everything changed. Chapter 2. The Meat Market. The altar of ascension was a giant circle of cold stone. It sat under the full moon like a giant eye watching the world. The air was freezing. Yet, the heat from hundreds of werewolves made the air shimmer. Elara stood in the line of young women. She felt the grass beneath her boots, wet and cold. She felt the heavy stare of the alphas sitting on their high thrones. Because Silas was the local alpha, he sat in the middle. He was a big man with eyes like a hawk. He wore a suit that cost more than Elara's house. He looked at the girls like a man looking at a menu. On the other hand, Elara looked at the ground. She counted the cracks in the stone. 1, 2, 3. Anything to keep from screaming. Moments later, the first girl was called. Her name was Sarah. She was pretty and smiling. An alpha from the north stood up. He walked down the steps like a king. He didn't say a word. He just grabbed Sarah's arm and pulled her toward him. Sarah's face went pale. Just like that, her life was over. She was a prize now. To make things worse, Silas started to laugh. It was a loud, mean sound. "We have so many flowers tonight," he boomed, "but I am looking for a rose that can handle my thorns." Elara felt a shiver go down her spine. She didn't know what scared her more, the alphas or the way the other girls wanted to be picked. They wanted the power. They wanted the money. They wanted the crown. In fact, Elara's mother had wanted those things too. And look what it got her. It got her a life of bruises and broken dreams. That's why Elara kept her head down. She let her messy hair fall over her soot-stained face. She felt like a ghost standing among dolls. Beneath the moonlight, she looked like a mistake. Eventually, it was Elara's turn. Her heart skipped a beat as the speaker called her name. "Elara Vance!" The crowd went quiet. Elara walked forward. Her dress was a mess. Her face was dirty. A murmur went through the pack. They whispered about how she looked like a beggar. They laughed behind their hands. Truth be told, Elara had never felt more proud. Before she could move, Silas stood up. He walked down the stone steps. His scent hit her. It was heavy and sharp, like old blood and expensive wood. He stopped right in front of her. Under the weight of his stare, Elara felt like she was being crushed. He didn't look at her face. He looked at her ruined dress. He looked at the soot on her skin. "What is this?" Silas asked. His voice was a low growl. "Are we invited to a ball or a pigsty?" "I tripped," Elara lied. Her voice was a small, flat thing. "You are a disgrace to your family," Silas hissed. He leaned in close. "I was going to pick you just to see your father's face, but you look like something the cat dragged in." As a result, he turned his back on her. He walked away to find a girl who was clean and pretty. Elara wanted to cheer. She wanted to run. Instead, she stayed still until he was far away. Soon after, she saw a gap in the guards. The warriors were busy watching the ceremony. They were busy watching the alphas claim their prizes. Her body moved on instinct. She turned and slipped into the dark shadows of the ruins behind the stone altar. She was free. But then she heard something. Chapter 3. The Ghost in the Ruins. The ruins were old and damp. They were the bones of a temple that had fallen 1,000 years ago. From there, Elara could hear the cheers of the pack, but they felt a mile away. The air here was different. It smelled of rain and ancient earth. As the silence stretched, Elara felt the hair on her arms stand up. She wasn't alone. Without warning, a low, pained groan drifted through the dark. It sounded like a man dying. It was a wet, heavy sound that made Elara's stomach turn. She felt it, clear as day. Someone was in trouble. Most wolves would have run away. Most wolves would have called the guards. But because Elara knew what it was like to be hurt, she walked toward the sound. In the quiet that followed, she found him. He was a heap of rags and matted hair slumped against a broken stone pillar. He was covered in mud. His clothes were so torn they barely stayed on his body. He looked like a beggar. He looked like a ghost. What followed was the sight of blood, dark and thick, seeping through his tattered shirt. "Hey," Elara whispered. Her voice trembled just a little. "Are you okay?" The man didn't move at first. Between one breath and the next, he lifted his head. His face was a mask of dirt and bruises. Still, when his eyes met hers, Elara's world tilted. They weren't the eyes of a beggar. They were golden, bright, burning gold. They looked like two suns trapped in a storm. The moment their eyes locked, Elara forgot how to breathe. "Go away," the man rasped. His voice was like velvet and iron mixed together. It was a beautiful, dangerous sound. "They're coming for me." "Who?" Elara asked. She knelt in the mud beside him. She didn't care about the dirt anymore. With every heartbeat, she felt a strange pull toward him. It was like a magnet in her chest was dragging her closer. Maybe it was fate, but she couldn't leave him. He looked so alone. He looked so broken. "The hunters," he whispered. "The men who want my head." Deep down, she knew the truth. If she helped him, she would be a criminal. If the guards found her with a ragged stranger, she would be punished. Even so, Elara didn't hesitate. She saw his hand. It was big and scarred. It was shaking. Without thinking, she reached out and took his hand in hers. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, she gasped. The touch was like an electric shock. It wasn't just heat. It was power. It was like her soul had been sleeping and he just woke it up. Between them, something cracked. The man's golden eyes widened. He felt it too. He looked at their joined hands like they were a miracle. "Why are you helping me?" he asked. His voice was softer now. "Because everyone deserves to be seen," Elara said. In the span of a breath, she heard the sound of boots on stone. The guards were coming. They were close. The torchlight was dancing on the walls of the ruins, which meant they only had seconds. Elara looked at the stranger. She looked at his rags. As if summoned, a plan formed in her mind. She took off her ruined cloak. It was still heavy and warm. With a single glance, she threw it over his shoulders. She pulled the hood up to hide his golden eyes. "Stay quiet," she breathed. While her pulse raced, she stood up and moved to block the entrance to the alcove. Before either could speak, the guards rounded the corner. Their swords were drawn. Their eyes were mean. Elara stood her ground. Her heart was a drum. Her soul was a flame. She was a wallflower no more. She was a shield. As the wind shifted, she realized her life would never be the same. And she let it happen. Chapter 4. The Unborn Choice. The guards' torches cut through the dark like orange knives. Elara stood in front of the ragged man, her legs shaking like leaves in a storm. She could smell the smoke from the torches and the sweat of the men. Because the Silver Moon Guards were trained to be heartless, she knew they wouldn't ask questions before using their swords. She felt the stranger's breath against the back of her legs, hot and shallow. "Step aside, Vance," the lead guard barked. His name was Hodor, a man with a face like scarred leather. "We saw a shadow slip back here. Silas wants no rats in his ruins tonight." She didn't know what scared her more, the cold steel of their blades or the golden heat radiating from the man behind her. Elara took a breath that tasted like dust. She looked Hodor in the eye. In fact, she had never looked a guard in the eye before. She was always the girl who looked at her boots. "There's no rat here," Elara said. Her voice didn't sound like hers. It sounded like stone. "Just my mate. I brought him here for a moment of peace before the final blessing." As the silence stretched, Hodor's eyes went wide. He looked at her ruined, soot-covered dress and then at the hooded figure in her cloak. He let out a nasty laugh. Because of that, the other guards started to snicker too. They thought it was a joke. They thought a girl like Elara could only find a mate in the mud. "A mate? That heap of trash?" Hodor stepped forward, his boots crunching on broken glass. "Show us his face. Let's see what kind of bottom feeder accepts a girl who smells like a chimney." Her body moved on instinct. Before Hodor could reach out, Elara turned and grabbed the stranger's hand. She didn't just hold it. She gripped it with everything she had. The moment their eyes locked under the shadow of the hood, the world stopped. She saw the suns in his eyes flare. "He's mine," she whispered. She meant it. She wasn't just lying anymore. She was protecting the only soul who didn't look at her like she was a mistake. "He is mine to look after. He is mine to keep." And all at once, everything changed. The air didn't just get hot, it exploded. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, a shockwave of golden light ripped out from their joined hands. It hit the guards like a physical wall, sending them stumbling back into the dirt. Elara felt a scream build in her throat, but no sound came out. Her heart beat once, twice, and then it beat in time with his. As the bond pulsed, She saw symbols of ancient light dancing on the man's skin. They were beautiful. They were terrifying. They were the marks of a fate she had spent her whole life running from. In that moment, she realized she hadn't just saved a beggar. She had claimed a destiny that was too big for her to carry. Chapter 5. The Moon's Wrath. Beneath the moonlight, the ruins were no longer dark. They were glowing silver. Above them, the full moon seemed to double in size. It was the lunar flare, the sign that a fated bond had been sealed. What followed was a roar that shook the very foundation of the temple. It wasn't a wolf's howl. It was the sound of the earth itself breaking open. Moments later, Alpha Silas burst through the velvet curtains. His face was twisted with a greed so thick you could smell it. He saw the golden light. He saw the silver sky. He saw Elara standing over a pile of rags. To make things worse, he saw the mark on Elara's neck, a faint, glowing crescent moon that hadn't been there a minute ago. "You!" Silas pointed a finger at her. His voice was a thunderclap. "You triggered the flare? With that?" No matter how hard she tried, Elara couldn't stop her hand from shaking. She kept her grip on the stranger's fingers. They felt like warm marble. Because Silas was a bully, he didn't see a bond. He only saw a power he wanted to steal. He stepped toward them, his claws extending from his fingertips. "That light belongs to the alpha of this pack," Silas hissed. "If the moon gave you a bond, it's because she meant for it to be mine. Step away from that dog, Elara. I will take what is mine by right." But then, the ragged stranger moved. He didn't stand up yet, but he squeezed Elara's hand. The pressure was a promise. In the echo of his voice, she heard a low, rumbling sound. It was a purr that felt like a lion's growl. "She chose," the stranger rasped. The sound made the air turn thick. "She chose the rags over the crown, Silas. The moon heard her heart, not yours." As the truth unraveled, Silas let out a scream of rage. He lunged forward. He was a blur of gray fur and muscle, shifting halfway into his wolf form. He was going to kill them both. He was going to tear the bond out of her chest. Before he could move, a pillar of white fire hit the ground between them. As if fate demanded it, the sky darkened to a deep, bruised purple. The wind began to howl, carrying the scent of lightning and old forests. Silas was thrown back again, his claws digging into the stone as he tried to stay upright. She felt it, clear as day. The forest was watching. The world was holding its breath. "Run," the stranger whispered. He stood up now. He was tall, so tall he made the ruins look small. He was still in rags, but he stood like a king on a battlefield. With his scent in the air, Elara felt her wolf stir for the first time in years. It wasn't scared. It was hungry. "I won't leave you," Elara said. "You won't have to," he replied. Without another word, he scooped her up into his arms. He moved with a speed that was impossible for a human. He was a shadow. He was a ghost. Just like that, they were gone into the dark. Chapter 6. The Shadowed Wilds. The trees in the shadowed wilds didn't grow toward the sun. They twisted and turned like they were trying to hide. That night, the fog was so thick it felt like wet wool against Elara's skin. She was still in the stranger's arms. She could hear his heart. Thump, 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 thump. It was the only sound in the world. Soon after, he set her down near a giant, hollowed-out oak tree. His rags were stained with fresh blood. He leaned against the wood, his face pale in the misty light. Even so, his eyes never lost their golden fire. He looked at Elara like she was the only thing that mattered in a burning world. "We shouldn't be here," Elara whispered. Her voice was a ghost of a sound. "The shadowed wilds. They say no one comes back. The monsters are behind us, Elara," he interrupted. Truth be told, his voice made her feel safer than any pack wall ever had. "Silas will not stop. He saw the flare. He knows that you are the key to a power he cannot understand." Because Elara was a rebel, she didn't like being a key. She wanted to be a person. She looked at the man. She saw the way his muscles moved under his skin. She saw the way the mud couldn't hide his beauty. Still, she felt a prickle of anger. He had secrets. He had too many secrets. "Who are you?" she demanded. She stepped closer, her chest aching. "You aren't a beggar, you aren't a nobody, you fought like something else. And this bond, it's too strong. It's hurting me." As her wolf stirred, she felt a heat rising in her blood. It was the mate pull. It was a hunger to touch him, to smell him, to mark him as her own. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, she realized she was falling for a man she didn't even know. Deep down, she knew the truth. She was already his. "My name is Kaelen," he said. He reached out, his thumb brushing her soot-stained cheek. The space between them burned. "And I was looking for a reason to keep this world alive. I found it in a girl who ruins her own dress to stay free." Before the words left her lips, a long, mournful howl echoed through the trees. It was Silas's bloodhounds. They were close. They were coming for the girl who stole the moon's fire, which meant their rest was over. To make things worse, the fog began to shift, revealing eyes in the dark, red, hungry eyes of the things that lived in the wilds. "Can you fight?" Kaelen asked. He didn't look scared. He looked ready. "I've been fighting my whole life," Elara said. She picked up a heavy, fallen branch. She felt her bones hum with a new strength. Her instincts surged. She wasn't a lamb anymore. She was a mate, and she was going to bite back. As the sky darkened even further, the first of the bloodhounds broke through the trees. Their fur was matted with spit and hate. Elara stood next to the man in rags, and she let it happen. She let the wildness take her. Soon after, the first drop of rain hit the ground, and the hunt truly began. Chapter 7. The king of dust, blood, and rain don't mix. They just make a mess that looks like a crime scene. Elara knelt in the thick mud of the shadowed wilds. Her hands were shaking. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't get the image of the golden light out of her head. She looked at Kaelen. He was leaning against a tree that looked like it was made of twisted bone. His rags were soaked through. Because the rain was freezing, his skin was turning a pale, ghostly blue. "Stay still," Elara commanded. Her voice was small. She felt like a mouse trying to boss around a mountain. She felt it, clear as day. The bond was pulling at her chest. It was a warm thread that made her want to crawl into his lap and hide. But then she remembered he was a stranger. She remembered the fire that had thrown the guards across the ruins. What followed was a quiet that felt louder than the thunder. Elara took a sharp rock and cut the hem of her ruined dress. She needed bandages. She saw a deep cut on his shoulder. It was jagged and mean. Because of that, she felt a sharp pain in her own shoulder. It was the bond. It made his pain her pain. In that moment, she realized she would never be alone again. "You have a regal way of sitting for a man in rags," Elara whispered. She pressed the cloth against his wound. The moment their eyes locked, she saw a flash of something. It wasn't just pain. It was a cold, hard pride. Even covered in dirt, Kaelen looked like he was sitting on a throne. He didn't flinch when she touched him. Instead, he watched her with a focus that made her skin tingle. With his scent in the air, the world felt different. He smelled like wood smoke and heavy rain. He smelled like home, even though she had never met him. As the silence stretched, she noticed his hands. They were big and scarred. They were the hands of a man who had fought 1,000 wars. More importantly, they were the hands that had held her as they ran. "Why are you staring, little wolf?" Kaelen asked. His voice was a low rumble that made the air thicken. "I'm not a little wolf," Elara snapped. She pushed the cloth harder against his skin. Truth be told, she was terrified. She was a low-tier nobody. She was the girl who fixed laundry. She didn't know what scared her more, the monsters in the woods or the way her heart skipped when he looked at her. As the truth unraveled in her mind, she saw a shadow move in the trees. The forest was watching them. The shadowed wilds were full of things that had been kicked out of the packs. Because they were weak and wounded, they were the perfect snack for a hungry beast. Without warning, the wind shifted. It carried the smell of rotten meat and old fur. "We have company," Kaelen said. He didn't look worried. He looked bored. Yet, he stood up in one smooth motion. He didn't wobble. He didn't trip. As though fate whispered in his ear, he reached out and pulled Elara behind him. His back was like a wall of solid oak. Between them, something cracked. The bond wasn't just a thread anymore. It was a chain. Next, a low growl rose from the bushes. A pair of red eyes blinked in the dark. And all at once, everything
Chapter
changed.
8. Bones and Blood. The rogue wolf was a nightmare covered in fur. It was twice the size of a normal wolf. Its fur was falling out in patches. It had 3 rows of teeth that looked like yellow needles. Before she could move, the beast leaped from the shadows. It was a blur of gray and hate. Elara gripped her wooden branch. She was ready to swing. She was ready to die. Her body moved on instinct, but Kaelen was faster. He didn't shift into a wolf. He didn't have to. Just like that, he caught the beast by its throat with one hand. The sound of the rogue's neck snapping was like a dry twig breaking in the wind. What's worse, Kaelen didn't even look like he was trying. He threw the dead wolf aside like it was a piece of trash. "Is that all?" Kaelen asked the dark trees. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, Elara felt a rush of power. It wasn't hers. It was his. The bond was feeding her his strength. It was a romantic and intense transformation process happening inside her soul. She felt her claws grow. She felt her teeth sharpen. As her wolf stirred, she wanted to howl at the moon. Not only that, but 3 more rogues stepped out. They were hungry. They were desperate. To make things worse, they were smart. They surrounded Elara and Kaelen. One rogue snarled, showing a tongue that was black with rot. As the sky darkened, the rain turned into a downpour. It felt like the sky was trying to wash away the blood before it even hit the ground. "Stay behind me, Elara," Kaelen commanded. "No," Elara said. Her voice didn't tremble this time. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, she stepped up beside him. She saw the blood. She saw the rags. She saw the man who was her mate. In the span of a breath, she swung her heavy branch. It hit the first rogue right in the eye. The beast howled in pain. What followed was a dance of death. Kaelen was a whirlwind of violence. He moved with a speed that made the world narrow. He punched, he kicked, and he tore. He was a king of the dirt, and the dirt was winning. Moments later, the last rogue lay dead in the mud. Kaelen stood in the center of the mess. He was covered in more blood than before. Yet, his eyes were still golden suns. Eventually, the adrenaline began to fade. Elara felt her knees grow weak. The world tilted. As the silence roared, she looked at Kaelen. He wasn't breathing hard. He wasn't sweating. He was just watching her. Because he was so strong, it made her feel tiny. It made her wonder, what kind of man can kill 4 monsters without breaking a sweat? "There is a cabin near the ridge," Kaelen said. He wiped a smudge of blood from his cheek. With a single glance, he checked her for injuries. "We can hide there for the night. The bloodhounds won't find us in the fog." As if pulled by a string, Elara followed him. Her boots felt heavy. Her heart felt heavier. That night, the woods felt alive. Every snap of a twig sounded like a gunshot. By the time they reached the cabin, Elara was shivering. It was a small, broken place with a roof that leaked. Still, it was a palace compared to the mud. Chapter 9. The Lie and the Lion. The cabin smelled like old dust and dry wood. Kaelen built a fire in the small hearth. The flames danced, casting long shadows on the walls. Shadows danced between them, making the room feel smaller than it was. Elara sat on a pile of old hay. She watched Kaelen. He had taken off his shirt to wash the blood away. His back was covered in scars, deep, old lines that told a story of betrayal. "Who are you?" Elara asked again. Her voice was steady now. Deep down, she knew the truth. No beggar had a back like that. No nobody could fight like a god. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, she felt the bond humming. It was like a bee trapped in her chest. It wanted the truth. It demanded it. Wait, was he a criminal? Was he a prince? Or was he something worse? "I was a man who wanted to see if the world was worth saving," Kaelen said. He didn't look at her. He looked at the fire. "I put on these rags because I wanted to see if anyone would help a man who had nothing to give back." "A test?" Elara's voice rose. Because of that, her heart began to race. "You were playing a game? While girls were being claimed like cattle? While my mother was being broken by men like Silas?" As the truth unraveled, she felt a surge of fury. She had ruined her dress. She had run from her pack. She had bonded to a man who was just testing people. In the echo of his voice, she heard the loneliness he had been carrying. Maybe it was fate, but she saw the pain in his eyes. He wasn't a game player. He was a man who had been hurt by everyone he ever trusted. "I didn't expect you, Elara," Kaelen said. He turned to face her. The air thickened. "I didn't expect a girl who hated the crown to save the man beneath it. You chose me when I was nothing. You gave me your cloak when I was freezing. No one has ever done that for me." "Because I thought you were like me," Elara shouted. She stood up. Her chest ached. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, she realized she was crying. "I thought you were a victim. I thought we were the ones the world forgot." Without thinking, Kaelen crossed the room. He was in front of her in a second. Under the weight of his stare, she felt her anger melt into something else. It was desire. It was a hungry, hot want that made her toes curl. He reached out and cupped her face. His hands were warm. They were strong. As her soul answered, she leaned into his touch. "You are not a victim, Elara," he whispered. "You are a queen who hasn't found her throne yet." Before the words left her lips, he kissed her. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a collision. It was fire and rain and lightning all at once. The space between them burned. She felt his tongue against hers. She felt his heart beating against her chest. And just like that, everything changed. The world outside didn't matter. Silas didn't matter. Only the heat mattered. But then, a howl ripped through the night. It wasn't a rogue. It was a bloodhound. It was close. Which meant the test was over. The real war was about to begin. As the wind shifted, Kaelen pulled away. His eyes were no longer golden suns. They were molten gold. "They found us," he said. Without another word, he reached for a heavy blade hidden under the floorboards. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, Elara knew the truth. Kaelen wasn't a ghost. He was the king, and she was the only one who could keep him from burning the world down. Suddenly, the door of the cabin was kicked open and the night rushed in. Chapter 10. The cabin crash. The door didn't just open, it died. Without warning, the old wood exploded into 1,000 tiny teeth. A massive bloodhound leaped through the debris, its eyes red like fresh sores. It smelled like wet fur and old death. Elara's heart didn't just beat, it tried to climb out of her throat. Her body moved on instinct. She grabbed the heavy fire iron from the hearth. Because the beast was focused on Kaelen, it didn't see her coming. She swung the iron with everything she had. Crack! The metal hit the hound's ribs. The beast let out a yelp and skidded across the floor. Soon after, 2 more hounds squeezed through the broken doorway. They were snarls wrapped in muscle. They looked at Elara like she was a steak. "Back to the wall, Elara!" Kaelen shouted. His voice was no longer a whisper. It was a roar that made the dust dance on the ceiling. Just like that, he pulled a heavy blade from under the floorboards. It was silver and etched with symbols of old magic. In that moment, he didn't look like a beggar at all. He looked like a storm in human skin. What followed was a blur of blood and fur. Kaelen moved like water, quick, fluid, and impossible to catch. He slashed the air and a hound's head hit the floor. Next, he spun around and kicked the second hound so hard it flew back out the door. Because Kaelen was faster than any wolf she had ever seen, the monsters couldn't touch him. "You're not just a fighter," Elara gasped, her breath catching in her chest. She swung her iron at a hound that tried to nip at her heels. "Who are you?" No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't keep up with him. He was a lie. He was a secret. He was the man who had kissed her like the world was ending. As the silence stretched between the sounds of snarling dogs, he looked at her. His golden eyes were glowing so bright they lit up the room. "I am the man you saved," he said. Under the weight of his stare, she felt the bond pull again. It was hot. It was hungry. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, she felt his strength flowing into her arms. She wasn't just a girl in a cabin anymore. She was a weapon. Suddenly, a dark shadow fell over the doorway. It wasn't a dog. It was a man. He was tall, wearing a heavy leather coat. It was Silas's second-in-command, a wolf named Marek. He looked at the dead hounds and then at Kaelen, which meant the real fight was starting. "The king in rags," Marek sneered. He pulled out a long, silver dagger. "Wait until Silas hears about this. He's going to love pulling your heart out through your ribs." Before the words left her lips, Marek lunged. Kaelen met him in the middle. The sound of their blades clashing was like a scream. Between one breath and the next, the cabin felt like it was going to explode from the pressure. As the wind shifted through the broken door, Elara realized that Kaelen was hiding something on his palm, a mark that was glowing through his rags. Wait, what was that mark? And why did Marek look so scared? Chapter 11. The king revealed the rain turned into a scream. To make things worse, more guards arrived. They surrounded the cabin like a ring of hungry ghosts. As the sky darkened, the silver light of the moon hit the floor. Marek and Kaelen were a tangle of limbs and steel. Marek was strong, but Kaelen was something else entirely. Because Silas was greedy, he had sent his best men to do his dirty work. "Give us the girl and maybe we'll kill you quickly," Marek hissed. He slashed at Kaelen's chest, ripping the dirty rags. In that moment, the cloth fell away. And all at once, everything changed. Beneath the rags, Kaelen's body was covered in royal marks. They were glowing gold, etched into his skin like living fire. She felt it, clear as day. The air in the cabin became too heavy to breathe. It felt like standing at the bottom of the ocean. Just like that, Kaelen stopped fighting like a man. He stood tall, his chest heaving. "You want the girl?" Kaelen's voice changed. It wasn't velvet anymore. It was thunder. It was the sound of 1,000 wolves howling at once. In the echo of his voice, the guards outside froze. Some of them dropped their swords. Because the king was back, the world itself seemed to bow. What followed was the midpoint shift. Kaelen took a step forward. He didn't use his sword. He just opened his mouth. "Kneel!" The Alpha's command hit the room like a bomb. Marek's knees hit the wood so hard the floorboards cracked. Outside, the guards collapsed into the mud as if a giant hand had pushed them down. As the silence roared, Elara felt the command hit her too. But it didn't make her kneel. It made her heart stop. Deep down, she knew the truth. The man she had saved wasn't a victim. He wasn't a nobody. He was Kaelen Thorne, the Alpha King, the man who ruled every pack, the man who owned the very air she breathed. Her world tilted. She looked at the marks on his skin. She looked at the power rolling off him in waves. "You lied," Elara whispered. Her voice was a broken thing. As the truth unraveled, she felt a cold fury rising in her chest. "You weren't a beggar, you were just playing with me." Maybe it was fate, but Kaelen turned to look at her. His eyes were no longer human.
They were pure, molten gold. The space between them burned. He reached out a hand, but Elara stepped back. She didn't see the man she had kissed. She saw a monster with a crown. "I had to know, Elara," he said. His voice was still the command. It made her bones ache. "You had to know if I was a good enough toy?" Elara snapped. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, she felt her wolf snarl. Because she was a rebel, she didn't care if he was a king. She cared that he had stolen her choice. Before he could speak, the sound of a heavy horse arrived. Silas had come. He stepped into the light of the cabin, his face twisted in a mask of shock. He looked at Kaelen, and then he looked at Elara. What's worse, he saw the bond glowing between them. "The king," Silas whispered. Soon after, a wicked smile spread across his face. "The king has found his mate, and I have found the only thing that can kill a king." Chapter 12. The Fractured Soul. The forest held its breath. As the silence stretched, Silas stepped over the bodies of his kneeling guards. He wasn't kneeling. He had a piece of dark stone in his hand, an obsidian core. It was a tool that could block the Alpha's command. As a result, he could stand while the others stayed in the mud. "You think you've won, Kaelen?" Silas laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. "You found a mate who hates you. I can smell her disgust from here. It's sweet, isn't it?" No matter how hard she tried, Elara couldn't look away from Kaelen. He looked magnificent. He looked terrifying. He was the man she saved. He was the man who lied. He was the king she hated. With every heartbeat, she felt the bond trying to make her run to him, but her mind stayed frozen in the betrayal. "Elara, come to me," Kaelen said. It wasn't a command this time. It was a plea. Her heart skipped. She saw the vulnerability in his eyes for a split second, but then she remembered the rags. She remembered the test. "Why?" Elara asked. Her voice trembled. "So you can put me in a palace and watch me like a prize? You're just like Silas. You just wear better clothes." Between them, something cracked. The golden thread of the bond turned gray for a moment. Kaelen flinched as if she had slapped him. Because of that, Silas saw his opening. He raised the obsidian core. Without warning, a wave of black smoke erupted from the stone. It moved like a snake wrapping around Kaelen's feet. "If the king won't give me the throne, I'll take his heart instead," Silas roared. Her body moved on instinct. Even though she was angry, she couldn't watch him die. She swung her fire iron at the smoke, but it passed right through. To make things worse, the smoke started to drain the gold from Kaelen's skin. He fell to one knee. As the bond pulsed, Elara felt a cold, empty hole opening in her own soul. "Run, Elara!" Kaelen choked out. The black smoke was climbing up his chest. Instead, she stood her ground. She looked at Silas. She looked at the man who had ruined her pack. Because she was a wallflower rebel, she knew how to find the cracks in things. She didn't look at the smoke. She looked at the obsidian core in Silas's hand. "You want a queen, Silas?" Elara asked. Her voice was steady now. Deep down, she knew the truth. She had to play a part to save a man she wasn't sure she loved anymore. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, she stepped toward the villain. Suddenly, Kaelen let out a roar of pure agony. The smoke was reaching his throat. What followed was a choice that would change the world. Elara reached out and grabbed the dark stone from Silas's hand. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, the stone didn't turn black. It turned silver. Just like that, the stone shattered. The explosion threw everyone back. Moments later, the cabin was filled with white light. When Elara opened her eyes, Silas was gone into the woods. Merrick was unconscious. But Kaelen was standing over her. He looked like a god again. Still, the look in Elara's eyes was enough to stop him in his tracks. "Don't touch me," she whispered. In the quiet that followed, she stood up. She didn't look back. She walked out into the rain, leaving the king alone in the ruins of his own lie. which meant she was alone in the wilds, but she would rather be hunted by wolves than owned by a king. As the echo of her footsteps faded, the forest began to growl once more. Chapter 13. The Path in the Dark. The fog in the shadowed wilds felt like wet fingers crawling across Elara's skin. She ran until her lungs felt like they were filled with hot coals. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't stop seeing Kaelen's eyes, not the soft gold of the beggar, but the blinding light of the king. She stopped by a black stream that smelled like old copper. She was alone. She was free. Yet her chest felt like a piece of her heart had been ripped out and left in that cabin. Because the bond was still pulsing, she could feel Kaelen's grief. It was a heavy, cold weight that sat behind her ribs. He wasn't angry. He was mourning. Still, she pushed the feeling away. She had spent her whole life hiding from alphas because they thought they could own the world. Because of that, she couldn't just go back to him. A king was just a bigger version of Silas. Or was he? Truth be told, she didn't know what was real anymore. She looked at her hands. They were still stained with the silver dust of the obsidian core she had shattered. She wasn't just a laundry girl. She was something the moon had picked for a reason. What followed was a realization that hit her harder than any blow. If she kept running, Silas would find Kaelen. And if Silas killed the king, the whole world would burn in his greed. Deep down, she knew the truth. She couldn't just save herself. She had to save the man she had chosen, even if she hated who he really was. As the silence stretched, she heard the snap of a twig. Her wolf didn't cower. It stood up inside her, its fur bristling. She didn't want to run anymore, which meant she had to stop being the prey. She turned around, facing the direction of the cabin. In the quiet that followed, she realized she was taking a bigger risk than ever before. She was choosing to walk back into the fire. She was choosing to fight for a bond she hadn't asked for. Because she was Elara Vance, she didn't do it for the crown. She did it because it was the right thing to do. She did it because she wouldn't let Silas win. She did it because she was a protector at heart. As if fate whispered, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and silver. Kaelen was looking for her. But Silas was closer. Maybe it was fate, but she saw a flash of red light through the trees. It wasn't Kaelen's gold. It was the color of a predator's eyes. Before she could move, the ground beneath her feet began to shake. Suddenly, the trees seemed to pull back, revealing a path she hadn't seen before. It led toward the ancient ruins of the Moon Temple. As her wolf stirred, Elara knew this was the point of no return. She began to run, not away, but toward the fight. And just like that, everything changed. Chapter 14. The Howl of the Tyrant. The Moon Temple was a skeleton of white stone standing in a field of black thorns. Elara reached the clearing just as the moon hit its peak. Without warning, a sound ripped through the air that felt like a physical blow. It was a dominance howl. It was loud. It was mean. It was Silas. He stood on a broken altar, his chest puffed out like a bird of prey. "I can smell you, Elara," Silas roared. "I can smell the fear on your skin. Come out and let me finish what the moon started." Her body moved on instinct. She stepped out from the shadows of a fallen pillar. She didn't have a sword. She didn't have a crown. In fact, she still had soot on her cheeks and rags for a dress. Still, she stood tall. Because she had seen the man behind the king, she wasn't afraid of a local bully anymore. "You're not an Alpha Silas," Elara said. Her voice carried through the ruins like a bell. "You're just a coward with a loud voice." In that moment, Silas let out a snarl and unleashed his power. He tried to force her to her knees with his will. The air grew heavy. The pressure pushed against her shoulders like a ton of lead. No matter how hard she tried, he couldn't make her bow. Because she had been bonded to the king, Silas's power felt like a candle compared to a sun. She stood her ground, her eyes glowing with a faint silver light. What followed was a look of pure shock on Silas's face. He had never seen a low-tier wolf resist him. He lunged off the altar,
shifting into a massive gray beast midair. He was going to crush her. Before the words left her lips, a shadow moved from the darkness behind her. It wasn't the Alpha King in his royal robes. It was Kaelen, still in his dirty rags, still bleeding, but his eyes were a fire that could melt stone. "Touch her," Kaelen growled, "and I will show you why the moon hid me from the world." Just like that, Kaelen met Silas in the air. The sound of their collision was like two mountains crashing together. Kaelen didn't use the command. He didn't use his title. He fought with his hands and his teeth. He fought to protect her, not as a subject, but as his mate. As the bond pulsed, Elara felt his love. It was raw. It was honest. It was everything she had been looking for in the mud. Soon after, Silas was thrown back into a stone wall. He was breathing hard, his fur matted with blood. He looked at Kaelen with eyes full of hate. To make things worse, Silas reached into his belt and pulled out a strange silver device. It looked like a trap made of moonlight and jagged wire. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, Elara realized it was a mate breaker. Chapter 15. The Collapse of Destiny. The air turned cold and smelled of ozone. Moments later, Silas threw the silver trap at Kaelen's feet. It didn't explode. It grew. It turned into a web of silver wires that wrapped around Kaelen's legs. As the mark tingled, Elara felt a scream in her mind. The silver was burning him. It was designed to hurt the bond, to make the physical connection a source of agony. "If I can't have the power, nobody can!" Silas screamed. He pulled a lever on the trap, and all at once, everything changed. Kaelen fell to his knees. He wasn't the king right now. He was just a man in pain. The silver wires were digging into his skin, glowing brighter as they drained his strength. Her chest ached. She could feel every burn, every sting, as if it were happening to her own flesh. Because she loved him. Even if she was still mad at him, she couldn't stand still. What followed was a choice made in the span of a breath. Elara looked at the ruins around them. Above Silas and Kaelen, a massive stone archway was cracked and leaning. It held up the roof of the old tunnel system. Her instincts surged. She didn't run to Kaelen to pull at the wires. She ran to the base of the archway. "Kaelen, move!" she screamed. Rather than running, Kaelen looked at her and understood. He used the last of his strength to grab Silas's leg, pinning the villain to the spot. Elara picked up a heavy stone and slammed it into the weak point of the archway. As the silence roared, the stone began to groan. Dust rained down. Between one breath and the next, the entire structure began to collapse. Moments later, the world was nothing but gray dust and falling rock. Elara dove for cover as the tunnel caved in. She heard Silas scream as the rocks buried his trap. She saw Kaelen disappear under the rubble. She felt it, clear as day. The bond went silent. It didn't break, but it went quiet, like a candle being blown out in a dark room. As the smoke cleared, Elara crawled out from the debris. Her hands were bleeding. Her dress was gone. She was covered in the dust of the temple. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't find Kaelen. "Kaelen!" she called out. Her voice was a ragged thing. As if the forest watched, the silence was her only answer. But then, a hand grabbed her from behind. It wasn't Kaelen's warm, scarred hand. It was cold. It was metal. Silas's hidden guards had been waiting in the shadows. They pulled her back, their claws digging into her arms, which meant she was alone. Kaelen was buried. Silas was gone. And the guards were taking her back to the altar. As her world tilted, Elara realized she had lost everything to save a man who might be dead. She looked up at the moon one last time before a hood was pulled over her head, and she let it happen because she was too tired to fight anymore. Deep down, she knew the truth. The real nightmare was just beginning. Chapter 16. The Chains of the Altar. The smell of your own blood is something you never forget. It's metallic and hot, like copper pennies left in the sun.
Elara Vance woke up with her face pressed into the cold, wet stone of the altar of ascension. Her wrists felt like they were being bitten by fire. What's worse, when she tried to move, the heavy clink of iron reminded her she was a prisoner. She wasn't the girl who ruined her dress anymore. She was a criminal in chains. Because the silver in the shackles was pure, her wolf felt like it was drowning in a bucket of ice. Every time she breathed, the metal stung her skin. She looked up and saw the pack. They weren't cheering tonight. They were quiet, their eyes wide with fear. To make things worse, Silas stood above her on the high throne. One side of his face was a mess of purple bruises and red cuts from the cave-in. He looked like a demon made of spite. "The beggar is dead!" Silas's voice boomed across the amphitheater. "Your little toy is rotting under a mountain of rock, Elara." No matter how hard she tried, Elara couldn't stop the tears from hot-tracking down her face. She saw the images in her head, the stones falling, the dust rising, and Kaelen's golden eyes disappearing into the dark. She had pulled the roof down. She had killed the man she saved. Deep down, she knew the truth. Her rebellion had cost the only person who ever saw her as a person. "You're a murderer, Silas," Elara choked out. Her voice was thin and dry. Before she could move, Silas stepped down and grabbed her chin. His fingers dug into her jaw. In that moment, she saw the madness in his eyes. He didn't just want her. He wanted the power of the bond she had triggered. Because he was a bully, he thought he could just reach in and take it. "I am the Alpha," Silas screamed, "and tomorrow, at sunrise, I will claim you. I will break that bond with a silver blade and make you mine. The king is gone. His rags are all that's left." As the silence roared, he threw a piece of cloth at her feet. It was the soot-stained cloak. It was soaked in dark, dried blood. Elara grabbed it and pulled it to her chest. It still smelled like him, like wood smoke and rain. Wait, have you ever felt a pain so deep it made your bones feel like glass? That was Elara. She was alone in a world of monsters. Moments later, the guards dragged her away. They didn't take her to the laundry room or a cell. They took her to the center of the square. What followed was the sight of a cage. It wasn't made of wood. It was made of cold, humming silver. As a result, Elara knew she wouldn't be shifting tonight. She wouldn't be fighting. She would only be waiting for the end. Chapter 17. The Silver Cage. The hum of the silver cage felt like 1,000 bees stinging Elara's brain. She sat in the corner on a thin pile of dirty straw. Because the cage was small, she had to keep her knees tucked to her chest. She watched the moon. It was smaller now, moving away like a friend who had given up on her. Still, she held the bloodied cloak against her heart. It was the only thing that kept her from falling into the black pit of despair. Truth be told, she felt like her mother now. She remembered watching her mother sit by the window, her eyes vacant and dead, waiting for a man who only brought pain. Not only that, but Elara realized she had done exactly what she promised she wouldn't. She had let an alpha define her life. In fact, her choice had led to a grave. "I'm sorry, Kaelen," she whispered into the cloth. "I'm so sorry I left you there." As if pulled by a string, a small, ragged bird landed on the silver bars. It was the same bird from the woods, the little messenger with the broken wing she had seen before. It looked at her with bright black eyes. Maybe it was fate, but the bird had a tiny shred of moonlight silk in its beak. It was a piece of her own dress. What's worse, the bird didn't fly away. It chirped once, a sharp, hopeful sound that cut through the humming of the silver. Before the words left her lips, Elara looked at her hands. They were still covered in the silver dust from the obsidian core she had broken. Because she was a word builder in her mind, she started to think. If I can break the king's stone, why am I let this cage break me? But then the doubt crept in. She wasn't a queen. She was just a girl who was good at hiding. Under the weight of his stare, or at least the memory of it, she felt a spark. It wasn't the gold of the bond. It was her own fire. Yet, it was weak. She looked at the guards standing by the gate. They were laughing. They were drinking. They didn't think she was a threat. That's why they didn't see her fingers tracing the silver dust on her palms. Suddenly, the bird took flight, circling the cage 3 times before disappearing into the black trees. Soon after, the wind shifted. It didn't smell like rain anymore. It smelled like power. A scent so strong it made her wolf let out a tiny, muffled whimper. She didn't know what scared her more, the idea that Silas was coming back, or the hope that she wasn't alone. As the sky darkened, Elara closed her eyes. She stopped looking at the cage. She stopped looking at the guards. Deep down, she knew the truth. The bond wasn't a chain, it was a bridge, and she was the only one who could cross it. Chapter 18. The Screaming Silence. Silence is a sound when you're waiting to die. It was the sound of her own heart beating against her ribs. Elara sat in the dark of the silver cage, her eyes closed tight. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, she realized the hum of the silver was getting quieter. No, she was getting louder. Inside her head, she started to reach out. She didn't look for the king. She looked for the man in rags. No matter how hard she tried, her mind kept hitting a wall of cold stone. She saw the cave-in again. She felt the weight of the rocks. Because she was terrified of Kaelen's power, she had pushed him away. But because she loved the man who had asked her to hide him, she had to find him. She had to overcome her fear of the crown to save the person wearing it. Kaelen, she thought. She didn't say it. She felt it. She sent the word down the golden thread that still lingered in her soul. Please, don't be dead. As the silence roared, she felt a ripple. It was faint, like a pebble dropped in a deep, dark well. Then, all at once, everything changed. The golden thread didn't just ripple, it snapped tight. A surge of heat hit her so hard she fell forward against the silver bars. Sizzle. The silver burned her skin, but she didn't pull away. Because the bond was back, the pain felt like a gift. It meant he was there. It meant he was breathing. As the mark tingled, she heard a voice in the very back of her mind. Elara. It was a whisper. It was a growl. It was the sound of a lion waking up under a mountain. Her soul answered. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She gripped the silver bars and felt the dust on her hands start to glow. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, the silver didn't just hum. It began to vibrate. It began to crack. As her wolf stirred, she realized she wasn't waiting for a rescue. She was the signal. Call me, the voice whispered in her head. Call me home, and I will tear this pack to the ground. In that moment, Elara had to decide. If she called him, she was accepting the Alpha King. She was accepting the power she hated. Still, she looked at the bloody cloak in her lap. She remembered the man who gave her his heart when he had nothing else. As if fate demanded it, she let go of her fear. She let go of her pride. Kaelen! She screamed, not with her voice, but with every atom of her being. She threw her head back and let out a mental howl that shook the stars. Her bones remembered him. Her blood called to his. The wind carried his name across the wilds, through the ruins, and deep into the earth. Without warning, the ground beneath the altar began to move. It wasn't an earthquake. It was a return. As though fate whispered, the guards stopped laughing. They looked at the forest. They looked at the shadows. Between one breath and the next, a golden light began to leak through the cracks in the stone floor. And just like that, the nightmare had a new master. Chapter 19. The Melting Moon. The silver cage didn't just break. It screamed. It was a high, thin sound like a glass heart shattering on stone. And all at once, everything changed. Elara felt a wave of heat rush from her chest to her fingertips. It wasn't the cold, mean power of Silas. It was the warm, golden sun of Kaelen. Because she had finally called him home,
The moon goddess was handing her the keys to the world. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, the silver bars began to glow red. They didn't feel hot to her. They felt like soft wax. Elara grabbed 2 of the bars with her bare hands. Without thinking, she pulled them apart. The metal hissed and bent as if it were made of wet clay. What followed was a shock so big the guards dropped their mugs of ale. They stared at the laundry girl who was now standing in a halo of white light. "The cage! She broke the silver!" one guard yelled. Next, Elara stepped out onto the cold grass. She felt the soot on her face begin to peel away, replaced by a glow that made her look like a star fallen to earth. She felt it, clear as day. Kaelen was close. He was moving through the forest like a ghost made of vengeance. Because of that, her fear was gone. She felt a strength she had never known. It was the strength of a woman who was no longer hiding. Under the weight of his stare, even though he wasn't there yet, she felt her wolf stand tall. It was a massive, silver-furred beast in her mind, and it wanted to hunt. Still, she knew she couldn't just wait for him. What's worse, Silas was already waking up in the main hall. He would be coming for her at sunrise. That's why she had to move fast. Just like that, she turned and ran toward the shadows. She didn't head for the gates. Instead, she headed for the heart of the pack house. She knew where the weapons were. She knew where the silver-tipped arrows were kept. In that moment, she realized her unseen life had a purpose. She knew every crack in the floor. She knew every secret door. As if pulled by a string, she slipped through a side window. The air inside smelled of old wax and wet dog. While her pulse raced, she found the armory door. It was locked with a heavy iron bolt. Her body moved on instinct. She didn't look for a key. She just touched the iron and felt the golden heat in her blood melt the lock into a puddle of gray slush. Truth be told, she felt more powerful than any alpha she had ever met. But then, she heard footsteps. Heavy, rhythmic footsteps. It was Merrick, Silas's second. He was holding a torch, his eyes scanning the dark hall. Before he could move, Elara ducked behind a rack of spears. As the silence stretched, she realized a huge truth. She wasn't just Kaelen's mate. She was his general. Because she knew the pack's secrets, she was the only one who could take them down from the inside. She looked at a crate of silver-tipped bolts. These were meant to kill Kaelen. Without another word, she reached out and touched the crate. The silver didn't melt. It turned to dust. What followed was a trail of destruction that no one would see coming until it was too late. Chapter 20. The Ghost in the Armory. The armory was a room full of death. It was cold and filled with the smell of oil and sharp metal. Soon after Elara destroyed the silver bolts, she moved to the heavy ballistas. These were giant crossbows on the walls. They were built to shoot down anyone who tried to jump over the pack walls. In fact, Silas planned to use them on Kaelen if he showed his face. No matter how hard she tried, Elara couldn't forget the look on her mother's face when Silas took her father away. Her mother had just sat there, quiet and broken. That's why Elara was doing this. She was being the storm her mother couldn't be. As her wolf stirred, she felt a surge of energy. She grabbed a heavy hammer and smashed the gears of the first ballista. Clang, snap. The sound was loud in the quiet room, but because the guards were all outside looking for her, no one heard. Moments later, she had ruined every giant weapon on the north wall. What's worse, she found the pack's supply of wolfsbane. It was a purple liquid that made shifters weak and sick. Silas used it to keep the lower-tier wolves in line. She didn't know what scared her more, the poison or the man who used it. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, she poured the wolfsbane out onto the floor. She watched it sizzle and burn into the wood. Just like that, she was stripping Silas of his teeth. On the other hand, she could feel Kaelen getting closer. The bond was like a drum beating in her ears. Thump, 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 thump. "Elara?" The voice was a whisper in the hall. It wasn't a guard. It was Sarah, the girl who had been claimed in Act 1. She was standing in the doorway, her eyes red from crying. The moment their eyes locked,
Elara saw the hope in her. Sarah saw the glow on Elara's skin. "You're free," Sarah whispered. "We're all going to be free," Elara said. Her voice was like a lion's purr. Because she had a heart for her people, she reached out and touched Sarah's hand. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, the fear in Sarah's eyes seemed to melt away. As if fate demanded it, Sarah stood taller. "Tell the others," Elara commanded. "When the king arrives, don't fight. Stay in your homes. Silas is done." What followed was a nod of understanding. Sarah turned and ran into the darkness of the servant tunnels. Meanwhile, the sky outside was starting to turn a pale, bruised gray. Come morning, the sun would rise, and the final ceremony would begin. Which meant Elara had to be back on that altar. She had to be the bait. As the wind shifted, Elara walked back out toward the stone circle. She didn't put the chains back on. Rather, she stood in the center of the altar and waited. She looked like a queen waiting for a war. Deep down, she knew the truth. Kaelen was no longer a beggar. He was the fire, and she was the wind that would make him burn. The first ray of sun hit the stone, and the great horn sounded for the last time. Chapter 21: The Return of the King. The sun rose like a drop of blood on the horizon. Beneath the moonlight, which was now fading, the pack gathered one last time. Silas walked out onto the altar. He looked proud. He looked like he had already won. Yet he didn't see that the ballistas were broken. He didn't see that his guards were nervous. He only saw Elara standing in the middle of the circle, her head held high. "It is time!" Silas shouted to the crowd. "The king is dead, and I am your new master. Elara Vance, kneel and accept your alpha." As the silence roared, Elara didn't move. She didn't blink. Under the weight of his stare, she let out a small, cold laugh. It was a sound that made the hair on Silas's neck stand up. Because she knew Kaelen was right behind the tree line, she felt like a god. "You're not my Alpha Silas," she said. Her voice was a roar that didn't need to shout. "And the king is very much alive." In that moment, the gates of the pack house didn't just open. They flew off their hinges. Without warning, a golden light hit the clearing. It was so bright that people had to cover their eyes. What followed was the arrival of Kaelen Thorne. He wasn't in rags anymore. He was wearing black armor that shone like glass. He had a sword of white fire in his hand. As if fate whispered, the entire pack went silent. Even the birds stopped singing. Kaelen didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at Silas. The moment their eyes locked, he only saw Elara. With his scent in the air, the world narrowed down to the two of them. As the bond pulsed, she felt his pride. She felt his love. She felt his hunger for justice. "I am Kaelen Thorne," he said. His voice was the Alpha's command, but it didn't hurt Elara. It felt like a warm blanket. "And you are standing on my ground, Silas. You are touching my mate." Between them, something cracked. Silas let out a scream of pure terror. He looked at his guards. "Kill him! Fire the ballistas! Use the silver!" But then, nothing happened. The guards tried to fire the giant bows, but the gears just crumbled. They tried to find the silver bolts, but they only found dust. As the truth unraveled, Silas realized he was alone. He was a small man in a very big storm. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, Elara stepped forward and pointed at the villain. "He is not your Alpha," Elara said to the pack. "He is a thief, he is a liar, and his time is over." What followed was the sound of 1,000 wolves beginning to growl. They weren't growling at Kaelen. They were growling at Silas. As her wolf stirred, Elara felt the shift happening. The power was moving from the tyrant to the people. With every step he took, Kaelen got closer to the altar. He looked like a god of war. "Let him go," Elara whispered to the air, and she let it happen. Just like that, the final showdown began as Kaelen leaped onto the stone altar. Chapter 22: The Shattered Crown. Silas didn't fight like a wolf.
He fought like a cornered rat. His eyes were wide and white with fear. In that moment, he lunged at Elara, thinking she was the weak spot in Kaelen's armor. He shifted into his gray beast form, claws out and dripping with spit. Because he was a bully, he thought a girl with soot on her face would just scream and fall. But then, Elara didn't move an inch. She didn't have a sword, but she had the truth. As her wolf stirred, she felt the silver dust on her skin start to burn with a cold, white flame. She reached out and grabbed Silas by his thick, furred neck. Just like that, the world seemed to go quiet. The power of the Alpha King flowed through her, but it was shaped by her own rebel heart. "You think you can own us?" Elara whispered. Her voice was a roar that made the stone beneath them crack. Before either could speak, she let out a pulse of energy. It wasn't meant to kill. It was meant to break the lies. As the truth unraveled, every wolf in the pack saw what Silas really was. They saw his greed. They saw his cowardice. They saw the way he had poisoned their world. Between them, something cracked. Silas let out a whimper and shifted back into a man. He fell to the stone, his face pale and sweating. Without warning, the pack moved. They didn't wait for Kaelen's order. They stepped forward in a giant circle, their teeth bared at the man who had treated them like livestock. Because the pack was finally free, they didn't need a king to tell them what was right. "He is yours to judge," Kaelen said. His voice was like a heavy velvet curtain falling. He stepped up beside Elara, his hand finding the small of her back. The space between them burned. He wasn't looking at Silas. He was looking at her. In that moment, he wasn't the king. He was just the man who had been saved by a girl in a laundry room. Next, Silas was dragged away by the very guards who used to fear him. What followed was a silence that felt like a fresh start. The sun was fully up now, turning the white stone of the altar into a sea of gold. Wait, have you ever seen a world change in the blink of an eye? That's what it felt like. No more cages, no more forced claims, no more lies. As the bond pulsed, Elara felt a massive weight lift off her shoulders. She looked at Kaelen. He was covered in dirt. His black armor was scratched. Deep down, she knew the truth. He was a king, but he was also her rags and dust man. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, she realized she wasn't mad anymore. She was just tired of fighting. Without another word, Kaelen knelt before her on the white stone. He didn't do it because he had to. He did it because he wanted to. As if fate demanded it, the entire pack gasped. A king never knelt. Still, Kaelen didn't care. He took her hand, his scarred fingers gentle against her skin. "I don't want a subject, Elara," he whispered. Her voice trembled. "I want a mate who chooses me every single day. Will you be my queen?" As the silence roared, Elara looked at the crowd. She saw Sarah. She saw the girls who had been scared. As her soul answered, she didn't say yes to the crown. She said yes to the man. She reached down and pulled him up to his feet, and just like that, everything changed. Chapter 23. After the storm. The pack house was different now. It didn't smell like fear and expensive cologne. It smelled like cedar and fresh bread. Soon after the battle, Elara found herself back in the laundry room. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't stay away from the place where she had first ruined her dress. She was sitting on a wooden table, her feet swinging back and forth. Moments later, the door opened. Kaelen walked in. He had washed the blood away, but he was wearing an old, simple shirt. He looked like the man from the ruins again. Because he was the king, he had 100 things to do, but he had come here to find her. She felt it, clear as day. He was nervous. "The altar is being rebuilt," Kaelen said. He leaned against the doorframe. "As a place for weddings, not claims. Sarah is the new head of the guard." "Good," Elara said. She hopped down from the table. With his scent in the air, the room felt warm. Truth be told, she still wasn't sure if she liked being in a palace. On the other hand, she knew she liked being with him. As if fate whispered, she walked over and touched the hem of his shirt. "I have something for you," Kaelen said. From there, he reached into his pocket. He didn't pull out a ring or a diamond. He pulled out a piece of soot-stained moonlight silk. It was the scrap from her ruined dress. Because of that, Elara felt a lump in her throat. He had kept it. He had kept the proof of her rebellion. "You were a king in rags," she whispered. Under the weight of his stare, she felt her heart skip. "And I was a rebel in silk." "We are both just wolves, Elara," he said. Between one breath and the next, he pulled her into his arms. He didn't hold her like a prize. He held her like she was the air he needed to breathe. As her wolf stirred, she realized she wasn't a wallflower anymore. She was the fire that kept him warm, which meant they were going to be okay. What followed was a kiss that tasted like a promise. It wasn't about power. It was about peace. In the quiet that followed, Elara realized she had finally found what she was looking for. She hadn't found a master. She had found a partner. Maybe it was fate, but she knew her mother would have been proud. She had broken the cycle. Suddenly, a group of pups ran past the laundry room, laughing and playing. They weren't being sorted by rank. They were just being kids. As the wind shifted, Elara looked out the window at the forest. The shadowed wilds didn't look so dark anymore. With every heartbeat, she felt the bond growing stronger. "Will you stay?" Kaelen asked. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, she didn't even have to think about it. "Only if I can still ruin my dresses whenever I want," she teased. Just like that, he laughed. It was a beautiful, honest sound. And all at once, everything changed. Chapter 24. The Queen of Rags. 6 months passed like a dream. Come morning, the sun always seemed to shine a little brighter over the silver moon pack. Elara stood in the center of the new garden. She wasn't wearing moonlight silk. She was wearing a simple dress of deep green wool. Eventually, she had learned that power didn't have to be a poison. It could be a tool to fix things. In fact, the pack was the strongest it had ever been. Because the wolves were happy, they worked harder. Because they were free, they fought better. Elara had turned the old altar into a school where every child was taught they were important. More importantly, she had abolished the great claiming. Now, wolves only mated if they both said yes. Do you think a world can be saved by one person's choice? Elara knew it could. That night, there was a grand feast. Every pack from the north to the south had come to see the new Alpha King and his queen. Yet, as the music played and the wine flowed, Elara felt a familiar pull. She looked across the crowded hall and saw Kaelen. He was standing on the balcony, away from the noise. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, she slipped through the crowd to join him. Moments later, she was standing in the cool night air. The moon was a giant silver coin in the sky. Kaelen was wearing his royal robes, heavy black velvet with gold embroidery. But then Elara noticed something that made her smile. Over his expensive robes, he was wearing her old, dirty, soot-stained cloak. "You're going to ruin your reputation," Elara joked. As the silence stretched, she leaned her head on his shoulder. "I don't care about the crown, Elara," Kaelen said. Beneath the moonlight, his golden eyes were soft. "I only care about the girl who saved a beggar. This cloak reminds me of who I really am when the gold is gone." As her bones remembered him, she felt a deep sense of peace. They had both come from the shadows. They had both found light in the darkest of times. As the bond pulsed, she felt their souls humming together like a song, which meant the story wasn't over. It was just beginning. "Are you happy, Elara?" Kaelen asked. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, she looked at the pack house. She saw Sarah laughing. She saw the pups sleeping. She saw a world where no one was invisible. "I'm more than happy," she whispered. In the span of a breath, she realized the truth. "I'm chosen, not by the moon, not by a king, but by myself." What followed was a moment of perfect silence. The forest watched them. The moon smiled down on them.
As if fate demanded it, they turned back toward the feast, hand in hand. She didn't know what scared her more, the future or the love she felt, but she was ready for both, and she let it happen. The Alpha King and the Queen of Rags walked into the light, and the shadows were finally gone. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to this channel for more Werewolf Shifters romance stories, and also don't forget to hit the like